You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number, and an engineer will be right with you.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Data Center Therapy, a podcast by Iboxy Consulting. I am Matt Yeti. I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Cozzolino, and we also have a third guest here, our former co-host, Mr. Chris Crow. Chris, why did I just intro you like that?
It hurts me. It injures me that your introduction would refer to me as the former co-host right off the bat before I had the chance to explain. So I actually transitioned away from Ivoxy at the beginning of this year and recently joined Cohesity in the secondary web scale storage space. So it was an agonizing decision coming from Ivoxy, which has really been so good to me for so many years. I almost made it a full 10 years, but it was a fantastic opportunity over at Cohesity, and it's something really I've always wanted to do, to join this later stage startup. Watching it grow, having, going with a particular product line, being able to work with somebody I had for a while. For those that don't know, one of Ivoxy's account managers, Patrick Lynch, actually came over with me. So, but yeah, Ivoxy has really been a wonderful journey over the last near 10 years. I've learned a ton in my time, really transitioning from doing core virtualization to, there was a stint in end user compute, to doing backup and data recovery, to, I guess, most recently, cloud and automation. So,
Well, we're glad that you're still in at least the same geo, Chris, and we obviously still partner and have an opportunity to work closely together. 10 years in any job, I would think, is probably going to raise some eyebrows, right? That's a good long time.
yeah.
And especially in our industry, where there's always a lot of change, sometimes for the better, not always, where frustrations can become a thing, right? 10 years is impressive, no doubt. And we're excited to support you in your new venture and talk about it here a little bit.
Yeah.
Mr. Cozzolino, how are you doing out there?
Pretty great. My legs kind of hurt. Got kind of snowed in out here, so it's been.
Yeah, you are a little bit east. Still digging out over there?
Still digging out over here. I had snow almost up to the hood of the truck. It's a not small truck, so I got to miss it. It was in Vegas for the Palo Alto event. Got to do some good learning there and skip all of the big snow.
Sounds terrible. Well, okay. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about where you're at right now?
Yeah, so Cohesity is really a secondary web scale storage system. And that's, it's really a node-based architecture where we take multiple nodes that have CPU, memory, SSD, SATA in them, and stitch them together, providing resiliency through either a resiliency factor or erasure coding, and then providing some enterprise storage features underneath that. Global deduplication, that's variable window, variable length, replication, encryption, some multi-tenancy functions, that sort of thing. And then on top of this is built a couple of, I'd say, key secondary storage bits of software. The first being that we can serve out NFS, CIFS, or object for a backup target, for home directories, things like that. Additionally, we have a backup product that's running on there that can natively back up virtualization infrastructures, SQL, Oracle, physical boxes, Solaris. And then the third leg of that is really a cloud strategy to do archival into public or on-prem cloud, being able to do format shifts into AWS and Azure for virtual machines, and being able to really provide quick mass recovery to workloads.
So we're seeing web scale, really, like you said, that was your tagline in what kind of product it is. Talk a little bit more about that, how that's different than strictly an appliance that you target for backup, or a backup or data protection appliance, right? How does web scale fit into that?
Oh, that's a good question. So web scale is really, at least for me, I guess, defined by the idea that I can scale, at least in theory, often to infinity, without having a performance issue later on down the road. A good example of this is actually the search engine wars between Google and Yahoo. Google decided to build their own file system that was actually running on top of commodity hardware. Took them a bit, I think a lot of people considered them crazy for a while. And their main rival at that point was actually Yahoo, who was
Who?
actually Yahoo. Yeah.
No, I know.
Ooh, missed that one. Yeah. Funny enough, one of the one at the time largest NetApp customers. Storage was very much a scale-up sort of endeavor. And so WebScale is really taking these individual nodes and stitching them together so that they can work together in an efficient manner, versus having to do controller upgrades, having to do shelf adds. But I think one of the other properties of this is, instead of being built on any kind of proprietary hardware or something that has to be manufactured, it can really run on just x86 hardware, which is, I think, a trend we've been seeing quite a bit.
Well, it's nice, like you said, the way the scale in the early days of the internet, there wasn't the explosive growth, or at least the constant growth, right? And you would take your capital expenditures, you'd exhaust that, you'd fill it up, you'd consume it, and then instead of adding a little bit as things grow a little bit, you had to go ahead and buy the silo again. Boom. Yeah. And big expenditure, and wait till that fills up. So I think that's one of the challenges that we're seeing with cloud also right now, is a lot of people look at it as all or nothing sometimes, right? And the web scale allows you to, I don't know if hybrid's the right word, but it could be. Yeah. But really, it allows you to scale out to cloud without necessarily forklifting everything to the cloud.
Right. Things that are products that are designed to live in kind of this neighbored hybrid environment. One of my examples that I'll use when describing the cloud and why I think on-prem infrastructure is still important is having on-prem infrastructure is like owning your own house, right? It's a big investment, but it's something that's more or less permanent where you live. The cloud is a little more like a hotel or a storage unit. It's like taking some of the stuff when you've overflowed and running it out there. Now, if you live entirely out of hotels, it's easier a lot of times. The bed gets made for you. There's no question that it's going to be more expensive, at least from an IaaS standpoint. So that's what I like it.
It's a great analogy, actually. Yeah.
You just can't, can't put your own pictures up on the wall.
Right.
Or remodel or paint the walls. Yeah.
Well, depending on who you are.
But I think that web scale is the differentiating feature of what you do or what you're trying to achieve. The ease in kind of bringing your data center into the cloud or extending out to the cloud. And we're not talking about taking all of your VMs and just plop and running them out there. Yeah. It's kind of, it's allowing you to be portable between without locking you or making you feel like, oh, I just moved out here to this one cloud provider. Now, how do I get my data out to another? And it seems like the web scale model is a way to ease that transition.
Yeah, especially a software-defined one, because if a node is something that's open and simple and can even run on different hardware vendors, then it's easy for me to take that and run it as an IaaS workload inside the cloud while still maintaining a certain control of my data. And it can be done on a more consumer-based model. So, for instance, you could replicate to virtual machines up in the cloud and then use that as a restore or even a test dev point for limited periods of time, which, of course, is a gross oversimplification to say that you can simply turn them on. We know that there's a few steps that I'm sure we'll be talking about a little bit.
Right.
Do you have do you integrate with a templating tool so that I can add Cohesity as a object that I want to deploy to AWS or Azure when I'm doing my software-defined deployments of the
Azure, yes. AWS, there's a couple of low-level functions that require us to deploy it in a different way. We're not part of the marketplace. We have to share out an AMI with you. But from there, you can certainly automate the process.
Okay.
Yeah, funny little bit of trivia. Inside of Azure, they actually, as a base, use an RF3 resiliency, which if you look at the chances of actually incurring data loss in there is pretty minimal. It's why we allow a single node system inside of Azure. Inside of Amazon, it's RF2, and that has a non-zero failure rate. So we actually require 3 nodes to start with, so we can stripe our own resiliency across it.
And that RF2, RF3, is that, and speaking Azure, I guess, then the RF3, is that with their standard data protection profile? Because you can do geo-redundancy.
That's with their standard
That's
one
their
within
base, none of the
the data
replication
center, is
taken
my
into
understanding, yeah.
Right. Well, we've got different terms being tossed around here, and you mentioned already IaaS. There's PaaS and SaaS, right? Let's go a bit deeper into those for those listening who might not truly understand where the barriers are, or where the delineation points on those definitions are. IaaS being, hey, I'm going to take my VMs. I think a lot of people I talk to think of the cloud and really think of IaaS. I think IaaS and SaaS are probably two of the bigger ones. They think of Salesforce.com, Office 365 as SaaS platforms, right? And then you've got, well, let's just run all of our VMs in the cloud. We don't need to have on-prem hardware. That's IaaS. Yeah. Where does Cohesity and the PaaS sit in?
So that's actually a really good question, and I guess the definition that I would use is IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, is taking these virtual machines with an operating system and running them inside of a cloud vendor. And that really becomes the operating system now, is this autonomous unit. It's flexible. It's also expensive. Mm-hmm. With a SaaS offering, it is very much where if I have Office 365, I run Exchange and a multi-tenancy, I'm sure it's not that way under the covers anymore. So I get a lot of economies of scale with that because I am hosting this application, but at the same time I lose a certain amount of flexibility because you interact with me, or at least you interact with whatever I have to offer. And if you don't like it, you're not changing the code on the back end that's going to affect all of my customers. Platform as a service for me is where I take a kind of one step above infrastructure as a service. So container as a service would be an example of platform as a service, Redshift, other database as a service offerings, that sort of thing. We are very much in being really an operating system that's web scale, is very much in the IaaS space. Now, I think we're going to see that change quite a bit. In fact, one of our first offerings is actually going to be inside of Google's cloud, and is going to be a backup as a service offering. And what that looks like is, because you can imagine with an IaaS offering, is you plop it inside of AWS and you have a Cohesity box that's running out there. You log into it, you manage it, you own your data, you can move it out somewhere, but you still have that expense that we're going to try to mitigate with some of that, deduplication and compression features. But as you know, it's always going to be a case of, should I just run this on-prem? Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. With DR as a service, Google is running our software behind the scenes, providing their own interface to then go and have it back up Google's compute, what do they call them, fleets, I believe, okay, inside of their, so the cloud offering that I spent the least amount of time with.
Well, can I ask why Google? Is it if it's a business decision and that's that, was there a technical reason?
I'm pretty sure there's actually a technical reason, mm-hmm, that Google with partnerships are.
I'm guessing they're probably one of the more flexible cloud providers simply because they're what, number 3 right now, or they're not top 2.
That's certainly my impression, because I don't have any hands-on experience with Google at this point.
Same.
So we'll see how that turns out. But
so this is going to be a instead of having the appliance on-prem, this is going to be a Google service, or Cohesity service, or Google service?
That's a Google service. We're partnered behind the scenes, but you go and consume this and say, I want to back up these compute resources, and it's handled entirely within their infrastructure. Actually, another example of this is what's going to be coming into Amazon here at some point, is being able to, because Amazon has some integrated backup services, mm-hmm, for EBS, so being able to take those EC2 instances with AMIs and EBS using that native backup function, which originally goes to a modified version of S3, and running it through a Cohesity box, but not actually storing the data. So it goes directly into S3, and we're able to index it on the way through.
Sure.
And then even take that data and push it out to a different region or something like that. It's a very Amazon integrated service. So it's not like you're running an IaaS box.
Mm-hmm.
You technically are, but it's a very light version that's just doing that transition. So that's kind of close, and the way that I see a few things working. But it really does feel like the Wild West out there when it comes to the cloud and data protection. Because moving to the cloud is almost another example of vendor lock-in. But then we're trying our best to get or is a version of vendor lock-in, and that's what everybody wants to do, right? And then we one up each other by saying, well, our vendor lock-in lets you not lock into another vendor. And so it's hard to know in the stack kind of where you should put that trust, whether it's in the hypervisor, you could say in the operating system. I think that's, if we're honest with each other, where containers are going to really fit in, is trying to provide some abstraction layer between the operating system and the application that's running so that we have some additional portability.
And I just heard Mr. Cozzolino affirm and agree with your opinion on that. I will let him go on that, even though I'm on the other side of things.
I had a question there for you on that, because so your agnostic ability to distribute data to all of these different cloud providers is going to let me, as a consumer, take and put my Docker container data on this array and let you handle pushing it to AWS and then push it to Azure and push it to wherever, Google Cloud. And then all I have to do on the back end is script my Docker containers to spin up, pointing to the cohesivity that I've got running up in that environment. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
No, I was speaking a little more generically, although that's certainly something that you can do. I think that Docker containers, or sorry, not really Docker containers specifically, but containerization in general is going to replace IaaS as that flexible component. Because right now, if you were to build an application, what would it look like to start it in AWS and then move it to Azure? Well, you can't use any of the platform as a service offerings. Those are all proprietary APIs. SaaS is you get what you get. With an IaaS offering, you can do it, but we have that significant downside of expense. So I could install Windows servers in AWS, install Windows servers in Azure, and then move data between them. And that's really, if we were providing data services for Docker or containerization, would be something like that. And that's not particularly special, I would say, in a secondary storage or DR product. And by the way, we are definitely secondary storage. We're not designed to be competing with all SSD platforms, and that's really because of how our file system is constructed to be node-based, and also in some of the efficiency in the way that we do snapshots. So whether you'd want to use it for that really depends. What you could do with it, though, is use this as an object store that could exist in multiple locations that can replicate between each other, and then go against our particular API versus having to program for S3 and Amazon, which of course that's the protocol that we use, but then having to do something separate for GCP and something separate for Azure.
You're kind of getting a little bit of an insight, listeners out there, to what an engineering day at iBoxes is like. The debates, the ideas, and I'm gonna hold back on my Docker input right now. Docker containerization, I should say. I lied. I'm not gonna hold back. I'm out. So my thought on it, and I know we're kind of getting off into the weeds here, but it's kind of what we do a lot of our time. Is containerization. I see the benefits personally, but I also think those benefits are being misapplied a lot of times. And I will pick on Mr. Cozzolino here, in that Matt came up to me and said, hey, a while ago, check this out, this. I can run Plex and this and deploy this and this and this and this. And to my point, yes, you can. But what are you gaining over just spinning up your own small VM? From an on-prem standpoint, I would say nothing if you are not spinning out hundreds or thousands of instances on an automated basis. You need to replicate and test and deploy. Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
It's not about it's not about replicating and needing to spin up a bunch of them at a time. I actually just had Docker save me a whole bunch of troubleshooting yesterday with my Plex environment. Went through an upgrade, rebooted the system, and the I don't know, it was referencing some DLL, some file, some Java, I don't know what it was, but it moved locations. It wasn't where it was supposed to be now. So I try to launch Plex, and it fails. It crashes. So my resolution fix for that, destroy my container.
Right.
And redeploy.
Because you can't troubleshoot it. That's your only option.
No, it takes my troubleshooting away. I don't have to troubleshoot. I don't have to go dig through these weird dependencies.
That's what snapshots are for. No.
So I would say actually as a response, the reason that IaaS is expensive is because you have to pay for the resources on a guaranteed basis. Because there's really no other way to handle a cloud model where containerization does a couple of things. It removes the OS overhead and you have a shared set of OS libraries that multiple Docker containers can rely on. But in addition to that, it
validates. It gives you a static point that this is a known working good deployment of this application.
I think you can do that. I think it's a different way of doing it. I'm not invalidating that. But it's not like that was impossible with Git or other things either in a more traditional structure.
Yeah, but the amount that you had to do to actually, because you still have
you have OS level patches, things like that. Absolutely, and like you said, the cost of a VM running 24/7 in the cloud. A lot of people don't realize. I'm just going to throw my VMs up there. Yeah. Whoa, how many hundreds per month is that VM going to cost you?
It's a lot, and I think it surprises a lot of people, But Docker can help you get out of kind of the DLL or SO hell that happens with operating systems, because how many of your guys' customers run multiple workloads per virtual machine where they're actually sharing libraries? And typically they don't because or I would venture to say they don't, because they want that isolated down the stack. So this kind of sits between what we used to do, where we would combine workloads on physical servers because of resources, versus the other extreme of every single workload has its own operating system that has to be maintained underneath it, and is trying to find a balance.
Yep. And I think you're also seeing kind of a bit of a fight for supremacy, at least a debate between on-premise and cloud, because I think depending on where you're landing this, you've got a couple of very different positions to debate from, too.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking from an on-cloud or an on-premise standpoint, I don't care about running a separate VM for everything. I really don't. The overhead in that is nothing. I've already paid for the hardware, really. But yeah, when it comes time to rent, hotel living, so you say, it makes a big difference.
I think the most cohesive cloud strategy I've seen was actually from one of your guys' customers, where their architect said, look, we are going to put everything in SaaS that we can. We are not going to allow a lot of customization because we realize that this is a trade-off, and we want to push back on business units. Everything after that, we're going to put into platform as a service. There's some limitations with that. There's some lock-ins we have to be cognizant of, things like that. And then there's limited IaaS use cases that sit alongside platform as a service for things that need to be extended. Makes it a little complex, but allows them to run there. But then they have a significant portion of their infrastructure that still runs on-prem. There's stuff that's rarely going to be a good candidate, things that should be close to the user base, things that should be close to the building, things that aren't cost effective to run in the cloud, or applications that simply aren't going to run well. This entire idea, which I think a lot of people ran into with the cloud, of saying lift and shift, let's take all of our applications, spend a lot of money and put them in operating systems in IaaS, cost a lot of people money. I think now we're seeing people refactor their applications to use some cloud native services. And I think we'll see where this goes from here. And I think getting into our main topic of talking about DR in the cloud, this is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to IaaS, DR in the cloud, which is really an IaaS function. It can be really useful in some pros of being able to say, let me digress for a moment here. I would say that DR and test dev in the cloud is probably one of the better use cases.
I would agree.
Because how often do you need to run DR?
It's one of those scenarios that every CFO looks at and says, I really have to drop that kind of capital for my
Yeah.
disaster recovery, and they want to get away from that. No matter how necessary it is, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
If you can pay for that on demand, if and when it's needed.
Yeah, because then the pocketbooks tend to open up a little bit.
Well, it's a direct cause for the effective pay. Well, why do
Yeah.
we need to pay that money if we're never going to use it? Well,
You had a
now you only
tornado.
pay if you do.
Yeah. But it's complicated. There's a few different ways to solve this, but you have to do a format shift into AWS or Azure. That's something that you have to contend with. I know Mr. Cozzolino has had some issues with conversion times with solutions and things like that. But I think it's a fantastic use case, especially if you're able to take data and really consolidate it. Like, why not use the same data set for DR that you would be using for test dev instead of having it sit there dark?
Or backup and archival as well.
Right. Use what you're using for backup and archival, and then when necessary, go and convert it.
Mhm.
And it's these sorts of draws that were, some of the big reasons that I came over here.
So if I'm Acme Corporation, what would my scenario be? What's my environment look like, or a problem or problems that I'm having where Cohesity is a good fit? Where if I'm an ideal customer, potential customer for you, what do I look like?
So Cohesity has a couple of main use cases, but backup and DR is the largest customer set that we have. What's kind of behind there, but also tied in there, is scale out NAS. So the ideal customer is really somebody that wants to protect infrastructure without a lot of the moving parts that are necessary. Because if I have something where the software is running on these web scale nodes, then it's a pretty simple formula. I add some nodes to size for the space, I point it at the infrastructure, I back that up, I can provide localized restore. Where it can go from there is if Acme is a sort of customer that doesn't want to run their own DR, and I'm going to oversimplify this a bit, and I think we all know as engineers that this is not just a cut and dry thing. There's engineering that has to go into this. But if Acme's requirements are, well, I need an offsite archive, and my recovery time objective is, I don't know, a few days, then maybe leave it in that archive. And one of the things that we can do is, if there's a problem, spin up some virtual appliances out in the cloud, run that conversion into AMIs or Azure's image format, and then spin it up from there. Alternatively, if it's a lot quicker, maybe they need to take those images and shift them on a regular basis so that they're ready to be powered on. And in certain cases, I mean, I'm sure we have customers that say, recovery time, recovery point objectives, they need to be as tight as possible. And then when you're doing DR into the cloud, I'd probably argue that for a certain subset, you're going to have to use some kind of application native protection. Applications that could do, maybe log shipping up to an IaaS instance of whatever database application or that sort of thing.
Are you seeing, are you seeing an awful lot of applications still being better protected with native, or are most of the things able to sustain a snap, a log truncation, log shipping from the Cohesity platform?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would have expected, I think before going over here, that application native backups would have been more prevalent than
But
they
does the
necessarily
cloud,
are.
the economics of the cloud, make that a less desirable model, even if it's a better protection model, right?
You know what? I've only seen a couple of examples of people using application native protection, because I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. If Acme looks at their server infrastructure, it's probably going to fall into three classes. One application that has to be protected as quickly as possible because they're losing money. The insurance policy on that is important. In fact, if it's large enough, you may find that the customer has a dedicated DR site, because if they're running it in IaaS, they may as well run it themselves. But I think we can all acknowledge that there's kind of a minimum size that you need to maintain a DR site where that cost is going to be less than what you have in the cloud. But you have another class of applications that need to be recovered, but not with, sub 15-minute recovery time objectives. Depending on the scenario, that's where Cohesity really fits in. If it's in a secondary DR site, we could act as storage. for a compute that's going to be running those. If it's out in the cloud, then we can spend the time to run a conversion, or we have those AMIs all ready to be powered on. That is not going to replace replication that is designed to be, sub 5 minutes. It's console or log shipping or DAGs or something like that. Just a different way of protecting things. And then they probably have another class of data that is a month or more out. Or
well, I'll tell you what's comforting. You're not over-promising that. A lot of times products come out, yeah, it can do that, yeah, it can do that. You look under the covers, oops, that technically comes out an awful lot. It's good to see Cohesity being in their lane in terms of being honest with what its purpose is right out of the gate.
Yeah, it's helpful to know what we're good at, what we're not good at, and at the end of the day, it's still the same customers. It's the same customers that I had at Ivoxy. It's the same customers I need to look in the eyeballs of now when I say what this can do, and it's going to be the same customers into the future that are going to be coming back if I overpromise something.
Sure. What have you found switching not teams, but you're not in the VAR space anymore, you're in the manufacturer space, right? What have you found to be the toughest challenge? And this is probably more of a personal question than Cohesity focused, right? I mean, you've gone from engaging with customers on as little as one-day projects to multi-week, multi-month projects, multi-year even in a couple cases. And then you kind of have to flush it in a way and move on to the next.
Yeah.
Do you find that you struggle with the habit that you've built, that you're breaking from it? Does it work? Does that focus somehow get redirected and it works for this? What are your biggest challenges?
There's a couple of them. The first is that I have a defined swim lane, which is one of the reasons that Cohesity is partner only. I cannot go in and troubleshoot their switch for them. I shouldn't go in and troubleshoot their switch for them and say, no, actually what you need is a channel mode active configuration to match our LACP settings. I can suggest that, but I often push people out of the way, out from in front of the keyboard. I don't have that luxury anymore. That's been an adjustment. And the other side of it really is around diligence of communication. Before I was working with so many customers and account managers that other people would help with communication, and things were a little more formalized with statements of work, with things that I had to do, with checklists that needed to happen. And at the very least, an account manager who's watching for this particular customer to remind me, that's not an expectation anymore. It's if somebody emails me, I had better get back to them within a timely manner.
Matt, do you have any questions for our esteemed guest before we wrap up here?
No, I think we covered most of everything I was looking for. Wondering about.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us again. Hopefully this won't be the last time we hear that lovely voice on this podcast.
No, hopefully not. And for everybody out there, my cell number isn't changing, so you can always feel free to text me or contact our friends at Ivoxy to set up a meeting or something. Be happy to say hi. It's almost 10 years. There's been a lot of great relationships that have been formed. So
I remember it was it would have been over 6 years ago now when you were recruiting me to come to Ivoxy.
That's right.
I think we went to Lot 3 down there in Bellevue. Had some good bourbon and comfort food.
Yep.
Good combo.
That has been a time. That's so now, passing the torch on to the dynamic Matt duo. I think you need actually somebody needs to grow a beard so you don't have to change the podcast logo.
Mr. Cozzolino, I think, has got that covered.
I got it going.
Perfect.
I haven't trimmed in a minute.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody out there is listening and has additional follow-up questions about Cohesity, about data protection, how it relates to the cloud, and if your company's looking at how to take advantage of things like web scale, I think it's definitely behooves you to reach out to us, reach out to Ivoxy. We can facilitate a meeting. We can chat with you about it. We can bring in Chris and Patrick if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the product. If you've got follow-up questions, you can always hit us at our website at ivoxy.com. Sign up for vSphere free assessment there, numerous other things, and we'll obviously have our podcast posted there as well. Again, my name is Matt Yeti on behalf of Mr. Matt Cozzolino and Mr. Chris Crow. Chris, thank you again for joining us. This has been another episode of Data Center Therapy. Have a good day, everyone.